A racist cop humiliates and arrests a black female FBI agent. You won't believe the ending. On one of New York's bustling streets, FBI agent Zora Davis was tracking down a criminal gang. She was determined, intelligent, and highly successful. But she was also a woman, and a black woman at that. More often than not, these two identities brought trouble her way. Zora faced far more prejudice than her colleagues on duty, especially on the streets, where she frequently encountered police officers responsible for maintaining order and ensuring public safety. One day, during a routine surveillance, she crossed paths with a racist cop named Jack Malone. The moment Malone spotted Zora, he sneered, "What's the FBI doing here?" Zora remained composed, showed her credentials, and calmly explained her mission. But the condescension in Malone's eyes, the smug grin as he subtly inspected her jacket, none of it was coincidental. "As if being a woman wasn't bad enough. You're black too?" Malone scoffed. "This isn't FBI territory, sweetheart. Step back." Zora had dealt with demeaning remarks like this for years, but today she decided not to stay silent. "I don't want to argue with you. My job is to catch the suspect in this area," she stated firmly. But Malone's hostility only escalated. Within minutes, despite Zora's warning, Malone moved to handcuff her. She remained calm, trying to de-escalate. But when brute force came into play, things quickly turned physical. Though Zora was highly skilled in combat, the situation was far from fair. Before she knew it, she was restrained, forced to her knees, unable to resist any longer. Just then, a car screeched to a stop, and a voice shouted her name. It was her brother and fellow FBI agent, Elijah. "Let her go!" Elijah yelled. He was her real partner, and suddenly, the whole dynamic shifted. "She's an FBI agent. What the hell are you doing?" The color drained from Malone's face. Zora closed her eyes and took a deep breath. But karma wasn't just working in that moment, it had bigger plans for him in the days to come. A day later, thanks to the documents and camera footage presented by Zora and Elijah, Malone was removed from his position. However, the accusations weren't just about incompetence. Through witness testimonies, Zora also exposed Malone's racist approach and abuse of power. This was karma at work. Jack Malone watched as the woman he had belittled without even knowing her was now respected and appreciated by the FBI. But there was something else. Karma was a lesson. Zora didn't just catch criminals. She won this battle knowing how valuable it was to stand up for what was right. From that day on, Zora continued her work with even greater strength, because no one could question a woman's or a black person's right to fight for justice. A week later, Zora and Elijah found themselves under an even greater threat after Malone's dismissal. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a blow to the roots of the system. While Zora felt some relief knowing that racist officers in the past bore not only institutional but also personal responsibility, she also realized that this case was about to reveal an even darker truth that would pull them in unexpectedly. Zora and Elijah soon noticed that Malone's removal had unsettled not only them, but also the entire police department. Some former colleagues began targeting Zora, and a few even started watching her every move. Rather than celebrating her karmic victory, Zora knew she had to stay cautious. One day, Elijah pulled Zora aside in secret. "Zora," he said, "I'm sure something is going on here. After Malone's departure, something far more dangerous has begun. A group of officers knows everything, and they look like they're going to come after you." Zora's face hardened at Elijah's words. In that moment, she faced a difficult choice. Risk her career and safety to dig deeper into this corrupt system, or step back and live an ordinary life in peace. But Zora knew she would never find peace until she exposed the dark networks infiltrating the police force. "We're moving forward," she said firmly. "We're going to figure this out no matter the cost." Zora and Elijah began their deep investigation. Right after Malone's removal, a secret group of officers had mobilized to silence and eliminate Zora. This group was a hidden faction made up of corrupt cops with powerful underground connections. Zora was determined to uncover the leader of this network. But this mission would put them in far greater danger than they had anticipated. One evening, Zora and Elijah sneaked into a warehouse to track the group's activities. The location was in one of the city's outskirts. The inside looked filthy and abandoned, but they noticed something. Before stepping in, Elijah took a few steps back and signaled to Zora. "Something's not right," he said. "This is too easy." Zora carefully scanned the surroundings. At that moment, she heard the screech of car brakes. They quickly backed away from the warehouse and turned into a side street. She could feel there was so much she didn't yet know about this group. But no matter how careful she was, something had slipped past her. The leader of this group was none other than Arthur Hayes, a former police captain who had once belittled and wrongfully accused her. Hayes had been watching their every move. He saw Zora as a threat and was determined to go to war against her with violence. For Zora and Elijah, the real battle was only just beginning. Zora was ready to shake the foundations of the corrupt system, unravel the dark networks, and fight for justice in a way that left no room for retreat. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She had become a leader in the pursuit of truth. But with every step she took, danger lurked and enemies lay in wait at every turn. Secrecy, courage, and determination were Zora's only companions. And she knew one thing for certain: karma wasn't finished yet. As Zora and Elijah continued tracking the gang, danger crept closer with each step. Hayes wasn't just a man who had humiliated Zora in the past. He was also a key figure in strengthening the city's corrupt police network. Zora knew she would have to confront his gang, but she also understood that Hayes was merely a pawn. The real enemy was still hidden in the shadows. A week later, Zora and Elijah devised a deeper plan to monitor Hayes' secret meetings. With every move they made tracking the gang's activities, something felt off. Zora had the unsettling sensation that she was being played, as if each step she took only led her into greater peril. One night, Zora and Elijah followed one of Hayes' men into an abandoned building he frequently visited. The place was shrouded in darkness, tight spaces, hidden passageways, and old rooms. Zora's instincts kicked in. She could feel the trap being set around them. "Getting inside brings us one step closer," Elijah whispered, "but they won't forgive a mistake." Zora turned to him, determination blazing in her eyes. "We're not stepping back now. We've learned too much. About you, about me, about this city. There's no quitting." Just then, the building's door suddenly swung open. Zora quickly pushed Elijah behind a wall as a group of men entered. Among them was Jack Garrison, a short but heavily built man, Hayes' right-hand man. Zora's breath quickened. Garrison might not recognize her instantly, but his demeanor was wary. "Garrison, we're finishing this tonight." "You know how Hayes crushed Zora's courage back then?" one of the men muttered. Zora studied Garrison's face and saw something unexpected. He wasn't just a street-level thug. He was also an undercover informant. A plan immediately took shape in her mind. "I see now why Hayes is using you, Garrison," Zora called out. "But remember, everything comes with a price." Garrison smirked as he turned toward her. "People like you have always been a thorn in my side, Davis. But this time, you won't stop me or my crew." Zora exchanged a glance with Elijah and smirked. "I guess we'll have to see about that." In a split second, Zora and Elijah sprang into action. A chase erupted inside the building. Every step brought more obstacles, but Zora kept moving forward, always staying a step ahead of Garrison and his men. Thanks to Elijah's careful planning, they managed to slip through the building's back exit after a few tense minutes. Once outside in the safety of the night, Zora took a deep breath. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We'll uncover Hayes' secret, but first, we need to go even deeper." One thing was clear in Zora's mind. Hayes' hidden power was the real target. Garrison had only given her a glimpse of the bigger picture. The true enemy was still lurking in the shadows. She was ready to shift her focus to those she once saw as enemies, high-ranking former police officials. For their next move, Zora and Elijah decided to track down individuals connected to those former police chiefs. They were prepared to take every risk necessary to dismantle Hayes' operation. The following morning, Zora, Elijah, and a few trusted FBI agents planned to infiltrate the home of Gerald Turner, the closest police official to Hayes. Turner wasn't just a high-ranking officer, he had the city's most powerful connections. If they could expose Turner's ties to Hayes, they could bring down the entire corrupt system. Zora's resolve grew stronger with each passing day. The pursuit of true justice had become personal. This wasn't just about her. It was about protecting the innocent people of the city, and she wouldn't stop until the truth was exposed. Here's the American English translation of the text you provided. Zora, while investigating the dirty relationships of former police chiefs, decided not only to expose the criminals, but also the deeply embedded sexist barriers within the system. With every step, she felt the walls in front of her rise even higher. But there was no turning back now. Unraveling the corrupt police networks in the city turned into a battle to understand a woman's strong stance, and every moment she resisted. Every morning when Zora woke up, she realized she was slowly shedding the weight, not only of being a woman, but also of living under the gaze of a society that constantly questioned her strength. The prejudices of the past would force them to see her not just as a chance, but as a real threat. One morning, as Zora and Elijah prepared to head to Gerald Turner's house, Zora took a deep breath after putting her gun in her pocket. This wasn't just a mission, it was a matter of revenge. She was always seen as the helper and looked down upon, but now she was a woman carving her own path. "Zora, this is a really dangerous move," Elijah said, his voice filled with concern. "Seeing them with your own eyes might expose you to the same injustice again." Zora turned to Elijah and said, "I always have to take one more step. For a woman to truly stand, she has to risk everything." She continued, "I've been dragged after justice my whole life, but now I will fight for that justice to be with me." When Zora opened her eyes with a look symbolizing the power of women, she realized that everything had turned into a much larger war. This wasn't just about womanhood, but about how much a woman's voice could be suppressed, and at what points she had to defend her identity. With every step, she was experiencing what society expected from women, how much of it was accepted, and most importantly, how much a woman could be ignored by others. This was a kind of invisible war. When Zora and Elijah managed to sneak into Turner's house, the atmosphere inside was tense and chaotic. They carefully stepped into the room. However, as soon as they entered, Zora would unexpectedly face a life that questioned a woman's power. In Turner's room, there was a large wall map, but the names marked on the map included addresses and even the names of past female agents. For a moment, Zora's eyes lit up. Many women's names were there, but all of them were somehow lost, forgotten, or unseen. Those women were a reflection of a system that wanted to silence their voices and view them as second-class citizens. As Zora stood in front of the map, she suddenly understood. This case had much more meaning than just exposing a criminal organization. It was about the erasure of women's identities in a male-dominated world, the silencing of their voices, and being seen as nothing more than helpers. "This is not just Malone's or Hayes' problem," Zora said, turning to Elijah. "This is a problem for all the women in this city. The voices of these women, their identities, each of them is trapped in a piece of life, and no one heard them. I will be their voice now." After gathering the information they found in Turner's office, as Zora and Elijah left, Zora's anger began to grow. In a world dominated by men that suppressed women's voices, Zora would not only teach them about her powerful position in the FBI, but also show how a woman could create her own power in this corrupt world. Zora was not only chasing justice, she was defending the identity of women, drawing strength from every breaking point in her past, making their voices heard louder, and shedding light on society's darkest corners with every step she took. Zora's struggle was no longer just a criminal investigation. She had become a warrior fighting for the justice of all women. And with every difficult step, she was strengthening her own identity. Zora would continue her fight for equality, saying, "We will fight for not just justice, but for equality, so that a woman could be strong and visible in every area of society." Over time, Zora's journey for justice, which had become not only her personal fight, but also the fight for all women, targeted not only the criminals, but also the injustice, the pressures of the system, and social inequality. With every step, while overcoming both societal and individual barriers, she was growing in the eyes of everyone who knew her. Zora was no longer just an FBI agent. She had become a symbol of women's voices and defending their rights. One day, Zora, along with Elijah, was planning to make her final move to decipher one of Hayes and Turner's biggest operations. Zora was now ready to shake the male-dominated structures that suppressed women's voices and erased their identities, fighting for her own identity and the rights of others. For this big operation, Zora had gathered a group of female activists and former agents. In their eyes, Zora was not just a leader, but also a savior. A generation of women who believed that finding their rightful place in society was possible through Zora's struggle was following her. One night, Zora and her team moved to uncover Hayes and Turner's secret operations. However, this time, they faced not only corrupt police officers, but an even bigger threat. Those following Zora would try every possible way to silence their voices, resorting to ugly methods to stop her. As Zora and her team prepared to enter the building, they encountered a trap. At that moment, Zora knew the end was near. But no matter what happened, there was no retreat. They would reach their goal and make one last move to ensure justice. However, there was something Zora didn't know. Turner was the true rebel behind the entire operation, and he was making secret plans to catch her at every step. When they entered the building, Zora and her team found themselves in a major confrontation. The guns were firing, every corner was filled with danger. As Zora moved forward cold-bloodedly, she turned to Elijah and said, "Women won this war in the end. No matter what happens, don't forget that." But unfortunately, Zora fell into Turner's hidden trap at the most critical moment of her struggle. Suddenly, during the intense conflict, she was ambushed by Turner and a few of his men. A bullet pierced through Zora's shoulder, and her body crashed heavily to the ground. Elijah, in desperation, tried to lift Zora, but Zora's eyes no longer looked at him with hope. They were the eyes of a woman who had defended the voices of women and spent her entire being for justice. As Zora took her last breath, she forced a smile at Elijah. "We did it, Elijah," she said, her breath growing weaker. "Women won. Now, their voices will be heard." Elijah, holding Zora's hands, cried out, "Zora, hang on. Please, I don't want to lose you." But Zora, knowing how a woman sacrifices herself and how valuable it is to leave a mark on society, closed her eyes one last time. Her death became both a painful loss and an unforgettable symbol of women's strength. Zora's death deeply shook the entire city. Her fight for justice echoed in every corner. Zora had now become a hero, a symbol. Women not only cried for her, but also, inspired by Zora's strength, began to fight their own battles. After Zora's death, women's rights advocates, activists, and many others organized a large march to honor her. Hundreds of women gathered to celebrate Zora's life and struggle. That day, Zora's name was etched in history, not only as a memory, but as a symbol of a movement. In Zora's memory, schools, associations, and organizations working for women's rights in many cities began to carry her name. Zora Davis was not only an FBI agent, but became the voice of all women. Her name was a symbol of freedom, equality, and justice. A year later, Zora's family and friends held a large memorial service. One of the city's most important squares began to be named after Zora. Zora's struggle had transformed into an awakening not just for one woman, but for all humanity. She would never be forgotten. Zora Davis, not only a hero, but also a light that helped women find their inner strength, made her name known worldwide. As Zora took her last breath, she sent a weak smile toward Elijah. But this smile carried not only love and devotion to him, but also a deep meaning about how a woman's life and struggle should leave a mark. Her eyes shined one last time before accepting that everything was over. That light conveyed how valuable it is to defend the rights, voices, and identities of women who have been suppressed for years. It was a reflection of Zora's belief in the world and in every woman in her heart. As Zora took her last breath, Elijah's body froze. He felt the pain, anger, and helplessness all at once. "Zora!" he shouted, but received no response. Zora's body was growing cold, but her struggle, the echo of what she had lived through, would last forever for the survivors. Zora had sacrificed her life, but her struggle symbolized a woman's resistance and power against societal systems. She had even resisted death, continuing to fight after merging with the earth. Everything would be shaped by those who followed Zora's footsteps and embraced her legacy. After Zora's death, a great void formed in the city, but this void was not filled with darkness. It began to fill with a light that would continue her struggle. Zora had put her entire being into making women's voices heard after her death. She was no longer just a police officer or an agent. She had become a defender of justice, equality, human rights, and most importantly, women's rights. Zora's name began to be spoken everywhere. After Zora's death, women's rights advocates and activists held a large march in her name. This march was not just to commemorate a woman's death. It was also a step toward preserving Zora's struggle and spirit for all women. At the start of the march, Lisa, a former FBI agent and one of Zora's closest friends, gave a speech. Her speech spoke of how the void left by Zora's death had transformed into a source of power. "Zora," said Lisa, "fought not just to change the city, but the whole world. She risked her life for every woman to freely raise her voice. Zora is no longer just a name. She has become a figure that symbolizes the power of women. Her name will be the symbol of the struggle for freedom and the equality that is deserved." After Zora's death, women's rights organizations quickly gathered and launched a movement that would carry Zora's fight even further. Hundreds of women began to fill the city, celebrating Zora's life and following in her footsteps. With every step, Zora's influence and legacy were felt more. A week after Zora's death, a large memorial service was held in the city center. This celebration was not only for Zora, but for every woman whose life had been changed. At the beginning of the ceremony, Zora's closest friends, family, and comrades gathered to erect a monument in her name. In the city square, Zora's statue stood, symbolizing the fight she had given for justice and equality. Beneath the statue, one of Zora's most famous quotes was engraved, "Until women's voices are heard, justice cannot be complete." During the unveiling of Zora's statue, many women activists and social justice advocates gathered to honor her memory and carry her legacy. Women inspired by Zora's struggle had found courage and drawn inspiration in their fight to change the world. Speeches, songs, and poems were made, all aimed at keeping Zora's name alive. Many women wore blue ribbons that day to show their respect for Zora's memory. Blue had become synonymous with Zora's eyes, symbolizing her freedom and resistance. At the end of the ceremony, Zora's family and friends placed flowers at her grave. One of the largest squares in the city began to be named after Zora. After Zora's death, her legacy extended beyond just women's rights. It became the struggle of everyone seeking justice. Years after Zora's death, her name continued to live on, not just as a memory, but as a legend symbolizing the power of social change. Every woman, drawing strength from Zora's struggle and courage, began to raise her voice. Organizations, educational centers, and projects related to women's rights that carried Zora's name continued to honor her legacy. Even after her death, every movement that strengthened women's place in society and made their struggles visible honored Zora's spirit. The city grew by remembering Zora's name every day. Each day, as part of Zora's struggle, steps were taken toward creating a better world for women.